กัน
เหมือนกัน
ไม่สาน
ผมนั่งมอไซค์มา
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're very sorry that we ran a little late tonight. Some of our journalists have actually been out there covering news, and it took a while to get this going in time. I'm Gwen Robinson, President of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand and Editor-at-Large of Nikkei Asian Review. And as you know, if you're watching this, we're here tonight on International Women's Day to discuss women in media, hurdles and milestones, the view from Thailand. So before I get to that, I'd just like to remind you that this week, later on Thursday, we will have a night dealing with Myanmar's crisis with a benefit night for Myanmar media, and hope that you'll either tune in or come to that. We have a excellent panel of journalists from inside Myanmar and here. We'll bring those in by Zoom. And we have a few other events coming up, so please check our website or social media for details. And turning to the program at hand, I'd just like to say that it's very appropriate we have such a diverse and interesting panel tonight to mark Women's Day, and the theme is choosing to challenge, which I think all these women have in their own way. So just to briefly introduce before we turn to the discussion, on my second from the right, on my immediate right, we have Panu Wongchoam, our FCCT board member, who has kindly offered to interpret tonight, for Kun Tapani Yadsichai, founder of The Reporters and an investigative journalist at Channel 3's Samiti. Thanks for coming, Kun Tapani. And next to her is Tasani Vejpongsa, video journalist at AP, Associated Press, Thailand. And next to her is Pear Manichot, reporter and digital lead at Thai Inquirer, which is an online journal. And last but very not least is Tara Yam Kamalvatanavich, freelance journalist and video producer who has written, who has covered extensively on women's issues and many other things online. And to kick the whole thing off, I think what would be good is just to hear very briefly from each of you how you got into journalism and why. So perhaps Kun Tapani, I'll ask you to kick off.
Thank you so much ค่ะ ก็ขออนุญาตนะคะพูดเป็นภาษาไทยนะคะขอสวัสดีทุกท่านค่ะทัปปณีนะคะความเป็นสื่อไทยอะคะ
เราเริ่มยังไงตอนที่เริ่ม
โอเคเหมือนถึงตัวเองนะคะก็เป็นนักข่าวมาก็20ปีในปีนี้นะคะเริ่มจากการเป็นนักข่าววิทยุแล้วก็มาเป็นนักข่าวโทรทัศน์ทีวีอยู่ ITV ค่ะซึ่งถูกปิดไปเมื่อปี51นะคะหลังจากการรัฐประหารนะคะปี49แล้วก็หลังจากนั้นก็มาอยู่ช่อง3จนถึงปัจจุบันแต่ขณะเดียวกันในช่วงที่มีเรื่องของdigital disruption ในวงการทีวีไทยก็เริ่มมาตั้งสำนักข่าว The Reporter ออนไลน์เนื่องจากมองเห็นว่าสื่อทีวีมันค่อนข้างที่จะไม่สามารถทำงานหนึ่งคืออยู่ทีวีเนี่ยทำงานทีวีก็ไม่ค่อยจะมีความอิสระในการทำงานที่ตัวเองอยากทำแล้วพอหลังจากยุคคือตอนแรกๆก็มีโอกาสได้ทำอยู่เพราะว่าในสไตล์ของการทำข่าวยุค ITV เนี่ยเราเน้นทำข่าวทั้งเหตุการณ์แล้วก็เรื่องของ investigative ข่าวสืบสวนสอบสวนนะคะ
So my name is Tapani and I've been a journalist for 20 years. I started off in radio and then onto television. I was part of the ITV television channel that was shut down by after 2006 military coup. And I've been a television reporter since. I do both sort of the spot stories as well as sort of investigative. And because of the digital disruption, I've started the reporters.
1 year
1 year, a year ago. I feel that through the reporters digital platform, I have more freedom, which I don't have as much freedom in television, and also it allows me to explore many things.
คือตอนทำข่าวทีวีอ่ะตอนที่อยู่สามมิติเราก็ยังสามารถที่จะทำข่าวในสไตล์ของตัวเองได้ก็คือทำเรื่องของ investigative ใช่ไหมคะข่าวเชิงสืบสวนสอบสวนข่าวการเมืองที่เป็นแบบลักษณะของการตรวจสอบการทุจริตเราก็รู้สึกว่าเรายังสามารถทำงานได้แล้วรวมถึงเรื่องของการเดินทางไปทำข่าวเหตุการณ์สำคัญที่เกิดขึ้นทั่วโลกเช่นเรื่องของแผ่นดินไหวสึนามิใช่ไหมคะเวลาเกิดเหตุเราก็สามารถเดินทางไปได้แต่พอหลังจากที่มีdigital disruption นะคะของวงการทีวีในทุนเขาก็ไม่ค่อยจะลงทุนนะคะไม่มีการออกค่าใช้จ่ายให้เราเดินทางไปทำข่าวเวลาเกิดเหตุการณ์ต่างๆได้เราก็เลยรู้สึกว่าเรามาหาพื้นที่ในการทำข่าวของตัวเองดีกว่าก็เลยที่มาตั้งสำนักข่าวของตัวเองก็เพื่อที่จะสามารถทำงานได้อย่างมีอิสระแล้วก็ทำข่าวในที่เราอยากทำโดยเฉพาะข่าวเรื่องเกี่ยวกับสิทธิมนุษยชน
So just basically, in television, I used to do a lot of investigative work. I do works on anti-corruption stuff. I get to dispatch to places around the world when there are earthquakes, tsunami. I get to all do that. But then after the digital disruption, those opportunities become much less. Investors, people in television are less inclined to send me out to do these sort of stories. So I started the reporters to enables me to do more work that I want to do, especially on human rights issue.
อีกอย่างหนึ่งที่มาทั้งสำนักข่าวตัวเองเพราะว่าในช่วงที่ทำข่าวเนี่ยเราเป็นนักข่าวคนหนึ่งที่เจอเหตุการณ์เรื่องของการถูก I.O. แล้วก็ถูกบูลลี่นะคะจากการทำข่าวของเราเนี่ยหลายครั้งตั้งแต่ยุคที่เราทำข่าวเรื่องของตั้งแต่ยุค ITV เลยด้วยซ้ำนะคะที่เราทำข่าวการเมืองซึ่ง ITV มีความถูกเชื่อมโยงถึงทักษิณก็เลยถูกกลุ่มพันธมิตรประชาชนเพื่อประชาธิปไตยเนี่ยเขาก็จะพยายามโจมตี ITV ครั้งหนึ่งตอนปี 48 เราไปทำข่าวที่การปราศัยของพันธมิตรที่สนามหลวงเราก็เป็นหนึ่งในนักข่าวเราเป็นผู้ประกาศที่รายงานข่าวอยู่ในสนามแล้วเราก็ถูกม็อบเนี่ยไปพูดเวทีว่านักข่าว ITV รายงานว่าเหมือนคนมาน้อยแล้วเขาก็พากันออกมาคว้างขวดน้ำนะคะขับไล่เราออกจากสนามหลวงแล้วมีการเผารถดาวเทียมอันนั้นเป็นครั้งแรกที่เราเป็นนักข่าวแล้วรู้สึกถึงการถูกตกเป็นเหยื่อทางการเมืองจากการที่เราเป็นสื่อที่มีเกี่ยวข้องกับการเมืองอะค่ะอันนั้นเป็นครั้งแรกของการรู้สึกว่าการเป็นนักข่าวเนี่ยมันไม่ได้ไม่แค่ของการเป็นข่าวนักข่าวในประเทศไทยอะค่ะมันไม่ใช่ไปแค่ว่าเราเป็นนักข่าววันหนึ่งแล้วเรามารายงานข่าวแต่วันหนึ่งเรากลับถูกตกเป็นเหยื่อทางการเมือง
So throughout my career I've started experiencing bullying and also sort of information operation against me since 2005, especially covering as an ITV sort of reporter on the ground, covering a PAD yellow shirt protests. They were accusing me of being biased. There's this image that ITV is linked to Thaksin, for example. People were throwing water bottles at me. There were real bullying, and I feel strange because I'm here to report the news. Why am I being pressured like this?
หลังจากนั้นเราก็ถูกตีตาว่าเราคือสื่อของทักษิณเป็นนักข่าวของทักษิณแล้วก็ต่อมาก็ถูกตีตาว่าเป็นนักข่าวของเสื้อแดงเพราะว่าเสื้อแดงก็ออกมาสนับสนุนทักษิณกลายเป็นว่าการทำหน้าที่ของเราก็ถูกตีตาโดยทางการเมืองว่าเราเป็นฝ่ายเสื้อแดงเป็นนักข่าวของทักษิณทั้งที่เราเองตลอดเวลาเราก็ทำงานของเราด้วยหน้าที่ของเรานะอันนี้เป็นเหตุการณ์หนึ่งที่รู้สึกว่าความไม่ปลอดภัยในชีวิตมันเริ่มมีขึ้นจากการที่เราทำข่าวการเมืองและถูกตีตาแบบนี้
And through political coverage, I started being branded as pro-Thaksin, which is not true. And then, going on from that, then they branded me as a red shirt reporters, which is not true either. And this is this branding has really put a lot of pressure on reporting for me. and you know, all this is not true because I just report. I'm here to report. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We'll come back to that. I think continuing the introductions, Taz, you are very unusual being a video journalist who actually began at a time where there was almost no women in no women. Well, I guess you were a woman cameraman, as they used to call them. So tell us how you got into it.
Yes, my name is Tassani, and I've been working as a journalist for more than 25 years now. So a little bit added on the years. So I started, my first job is actually at Bangkok Post as a reporter, and then I got a job at the Associated Press, very lucky of me, and I started off as a just sort of assistant, fixer, producer to a male cameraman, an expat who come here and works here. And by accident or by fate, you know, something happened to him. He got hit by a rock during a riot in Cambodia in the late 1990s. So AP called me and said, "We don't have anyone in Cambodia. Would you like to grab a camera and go there?" And I said, "Sure, I would love to." So that's how it all started. And continue until today. And my colleague is still working together with me. Some of you who might know him, Jerry Harmer, he's started this all.
So you actually began your career as a print journalist at the Bangkok Post, which is a very conventional career path in Thailand. And
Yes.
you leapt into becoming what must be one of the only camera women in Thailand back then.
For TV camera, yes, I was the only one for quite a while. But lately, you know, in the last, let's say, 5 years, I've seen more and more female journalists, photographers, female camera
You mean
persons.
Thais?
Yes, Thai,
Yes.
in the field. Definitely, I'm not lonely anymore, but we need more numbers.
Well, maybe they were inspired by you. Anyway, we'll come back to that. So, Pear, tell us about you.
Thank you. So, my name is Pear, and I am a reporter and digital lead at the Thai Inquirer. I am a newcomer when it comes to journalism. So, I've only been a journalist for a year. My background is actually in communication management, and I went to pursue my master's degree in international relations. But then one day, the editor-in-chief contacted me when I was in the States, and he said that, you know, there's a new business coming up. It's going to be an English online media publication. I was planning to come back to Bangkok at the time, and so I joined, and now I am the only full-time woman journalist working at the Thai Inquirer.
Right. And, well, we'll definitely come back to that. So, over to you, Tara.
Thank you. My name's Tara. I am also kind of a newcomer. I've been in journalism for almost 3 years now. My anniversary is in June, so coming up. I started at Coconuts, Bangkok, then I switched over to Disrupt, and now I'm a freelance journalist and producer. I work with various outlets, Vice, Sky News, Al Jazeera, Thai Inquirer, and yeah, I was previously in the media industry, but I worked with fiction, and after working in the industry for a while, I decided that I was perpetuating a lot of stereotypes and perceptions that I didn't agree with, and I wanted to tell true stories about my community, my hometown, and make an impact, truly try to challenge perceptions. And yeah, so I decided to become a journalist and producer, and I'm happily doing it still.
Yeah, I think you describe yourself on your Twitter as what, a multimedia
Yes.
producer.
So I do, yeah, I write, I produce podcasts, audio packages, as well as video. So
Right. So it's very interesting to have this spread of sort of more conventional media like Wire Agency and Tapani with reporters, and then Thai Inquiry, which is purely online, and you with the social media. But I think one common thread is really that all of you are in an industry in Thailand that is still, I think, largely following old patterns. It's extraordinary how in Thailand women have done so well in business, and they're definitely, I mean, nearly half Thailand has one of the highest levels in the world of women board directors, CEOs, and C-suite executives. But in media, I was researching. There's almost no woman being an editor or a leader of an organisation. There's very few women news editors, and there are some editors who are editors of fashion magazines or things like that, sort of reinforcing the stereotype. I wonder why that is. And the other thing that I did find out is that there's actually really a lot of women reporters at the reporter level, and women doing all kinds of things, particularly on social media as well. They're great on social media. So, you know, why is that? And do you have any thoughts? Perhaps you're nodding, continue. Oh, and is it any different from other parts of Asia, actually?
ส่วนมากเป็นผู้ชาย ค่ะในเท่าที่เห็นก็คือมีอย่างในไทยที่นักข่าวผู้หญิงจะมีเยอะมากนะคะแต่ว่าอย่างที่บอกค่ะว่าส่วนมากหัวหน้างานหรือว่าผู้นำในองค์กรสื่อรวมถึงในทั้งในตัวของสำนักข่าวเองกับทางสมาคมเนี่ยส่วนมากก็จะเป็นแบบผู้ชายใช่ไหมคะจะเยอะดังนั้นอันนี้เราก็มองเห็นค่ะว่าที่ผ่านมาเนี่ยจริงๆเราก็เป็นมา20 ปีแล้วก็เห็นแบบนี้ตลอดแล้วก็กลายเป็นว่าผู้ชายก็จะมีบทบาทนำในการที่มาตัดสินชี้นำว่าเนี่ยสื่อหรือนักข่าวจะต้องมีต้องทำอะไรต่างๆแต่ว่าคือส่วนตัวไม่ค่อยให้ความสำคัญกับคนเหล่านั้นนะที่ผ่านมาค่ะเราค่อนข้างที่ทำงานอย่างตัวเราก็มีหัวหน้าเป็นผู้ชายใช่ไหมคุณกิติสิงหาปัตย์ซึ่งเขาก็เป็นนักข่าวทั้งผู้ประกาศข่าวชื่อดังแต่คุณกิติเขาเป็นหัวหน้าที่ให้อิสระในการทำงานกับเรามากแล้วโดยเฉพาะงานแบบเราเนี่ยไปมักจะมีข่าวที่ไปกระทบกับรัฐอยู่เสมอนะคะก็ต้องมามีทั้งเรื่องกรณีที่เกี่ยวกับรายงานประมงรายงานทาสที่ AP ก็ทำเหมือนกันเราก็ทำเรื่องนี้เราก็ถูกรัฐแทรกแซงนะสั่งการไม่ให้ออกข่าวเรื่องของการช่วยเหลือพวกค้ามนุษย์ใช่ไหมคะหรือแม้กระทั่งเรื่องโรฮิงญาที่ถูกมีคำสั่งมาเลยนะว่าไม่ให้เราออกอากาศข่าวที่เราไปเจอเรือโรฮิงญาอยู่กลางทะเลแล้วพยายามจะช่วยเขาแต่เราก็พยายามไฟท์สู้ว่าเราเป็นคนทำข่าวนี้แล้วนั้นเราก็ทำเรื่องนี้เป็นคนเดียวถ้าเราไม่ออกข่าวนี้เราถือว่าเราไม่ใช่นักข่าวคุณกิติเขาก็เข้าใจถึงสิ่งที่เราทำคุณกิติเขาก็ไม่ทำตามเขาก็ให้ออกอากาศนี้คือเราก็ไม่ยอมรับสิ่งที่เขาจะไม่ให้เราออกข่าวเนี่ยค่ะอันนี้คือจริงๆมันขึ้นอยู่กับเรื่องของหัวหน้างานกับตัวนักข่าวมากกว่าที่เราคือทำงานอยู่ตามหลักการเราอะค่ะ
So basically, you know, I noticed this too. This issue where there's a lot of female journalists on the field, you know, in Thailand, but a lot of the people that make the decision, you know, in news organization are men, as well as people in press associations are male dominated, and you know. They do make a lot of the decisions in terms of coverage. But in my own experience, I also have a male boss, Kun Kitti Singhapat, a very famous, popular news anchor. You know, he gave me a lot of freedom so that I can do my work. And you know, Untapani mentioned two of the stories in the past, the Benjina fishing thing that AP also covered, but also the Rohingya issue, which Kuntapani followed very closely, especially in 2015, the boat exodus and all that. And she mentioned that, you know, throughout her all these kind of work, there's a lot of pressure from the state, from governments. And Kun Kitti, you know, that this relationship that she has with her boss, Kun Kitti, allows her to kind of push the boundaries. And you know, but that's kind of a rare relation, you know, between your superior and a journalist, and you know, that's my view on it.
Taz, you seem to. Oh, and by the way, I'm very happy let's just keep this as a freewheeling discussion, so people who want to buy in can, and otherwise we just keep moving on.
So you were talking about how we don't see that many female bosses. female bosses. And I think part of the problem could be that Thai society as a society are not ready to have female to be the leading role, making the decision, make the deals, because the managing director, the editor, the boss of the company has to go around and talk to business people, politicians, army guys, police. And I don't feel like a lot of sectors that I mentioned are that ready to make deals with women.
Right. How about, you might add, I can see you want to say something, but how about if I add that we had a little discussion before about, we all agree that in Thailand, like many other parts of Asia, the kind of nature of society means women, and particularly younger women, are expected to show deference, particularly to not just men but older men, and possibly this kind of inhibits or weighs on how you conduct yourself. So I'll ask the two youngest women on the panel, I hope you don't mind, I think that's obvious, how you, so building on that earlier question.
Well, as I said, I'm like a newcomer in journalism, but can I speak on my experience as a woman or a girl who grew up in Thailand? So I don't think we were ever kind of taught to be outspoken or have opinions on things. I don't think there was ever really that narrative for us or that space for us to actually really exercise our rights or have dreams that is beyond just being decorous, like you said, or being housewives. Me growing up having opinions and behaving a certain way are deemed as outspoken, opinionated, which I don't think the same narrative has been placed onto the men in Thailand. And upon entering journalism, I realized how little has been reported on women's issues and women's rights issues. When I'm on the field covering the protests, honestly, the female face that I see all the time is only of Kuntapani, which I'm really grateful for and really honored to be here. But usually there's just men on ground or there's just men reporting about it. So it's just been something that I think we all kind of know. It's something that is unwritten, that we know that our society's just been very dominated by men. The question is, how do you feel that affects you and your journalism and, Well, I've only started working for a year under a pandemic. I think what it has affected me is that what I've noticed is when I try to contact or interview individuals, whether it's organizations or ministries, foundations and whatnot, or going out to meet people, the fact that I sound like a woman suddenly, and I speak a certain way, suddenly they call me Nong or Nu, which suddenly I am demoted into this and placed into this hierarchy.
Maybe you want to explain what Nong or Nu
Nong and Nu are terminologies in Thai where how do I explain? You guys can help me out on this.
Little sister?
Yeah, little sister or a little mouse, yeah.
I agree completely with everything that's been said. I think there's a lack of women in senior editorial levels as well as position with authority to make decisions. And I've seen women placed in higher positions almost as for making the company look more diverse. Tokenism. So they're not really listened to as much. They're still being discredited, and they don't have as much say in the company as they're not taken as seriously as their male counterparts or so on. And I also think going on Pear's point, I've also experienced subjects of interview, especially people that are more senior, people that have more authority, being a little bit more dismissive about my questions or about our interactions because of my age, my gender, and discrediting the things I have to say. And I think a lot of things I wanted to say have been covered. And yeah, I think it would be nice. I think women have a lot to say. Like, I think the media represents, is very influential in how we go about our lives. It affects our values, our perceptions, our social consciousness. So I think it's important to give women opportunity to make decisions in media organizations.
Right, and I know that you've both experienced some problems with, well, I'm sure you all this panel has some problems with everything from, probably sexual harassment to power relations and power bullying. But one, I think, overall question is, how different is Thailand from, say, well, we could say the rest of the world or the rest of Asia, in terms of...
Working as a woman, right?
Yeah. Need to, well, you were in China a long time,
So
Chelsea.
I was working in China for a year and perhaps about 5 or 6 years in Taiwan. And I feel like it's more liberating there for women because those guys are allowed to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more assertive, and it's acceptable. Whereas here, we have to be polite. The moment we're aggressive, the moment we're being too loud, we're be cast away, or they don't want to see us anymore. They no longer want to answer our questions. So those are the I feel like I almost have to have a sort of a character that I play when I go out and do an interview with people, that I have to put on this face, like polite face, acceptance face, and I don't know how to deal with this yet. This is something I still feel like I have to learn how to confront people who hold power on something that they do and hold them accountable without going across the line that the Thai society have created, and still be able to operate and get an answer from them without being dismissed totally.
So you're saying it's
a
a particular challenge in Thailand as opposed to
think
maybe
so.
other parts of Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, Japan actually is similar in
It's
terms of
like
forcing.
that for...
Well, forcing women into, the kind of different
True.
body language and relationship and even your tone and things like that. But
But one thing I say about Thailand is you hear stories about sexual harassment from other parts of the world, like in Egypt, or you hear hard stories. But here, I think there exist those cases, but in a more subtle manner. So it's harder to spot, but as maybe not as obvious as some of the country.
แต่สำหรับตัวเองมองว่าจริงๆความเป็นผู้หญิงเวลาที่จะสัมภาษณ์แหล่งข่าวใช่ไหมคะโดยเฉพาะนักการเมืองคือเราพูดในฐานะเป็นนักข่าวการเมืองเราก็ทำข่าวการเมืองสัมภาษณ์นายกรัฐมนตรีมาหลายคนมากตั้งแต่นายกทักษิณจนมาถึงแม้กระทั่งพลเอกประยุทธ์จริงๆมองว่าความเป็นผู้หญิงมันทำเวลาสัมภาษณ์นักการเมืองเขาก็สนใจมาฟังเสียงเราแล้วบางทีมันก็คำถามจากนักข่าวผู้หญิงมันไปจี้ใจดำเขาแล้วทำให้เขาแบบตอบกลับมาคือบางครั้งพลังของความเป็นผู้หญิงมันไม่ได้ถูกมองจากรูปกายอะค่ะแต่ว่าคำถามหรือน้ำเสียงของผู้หญิงในการถามคำถามแม้กระทั่งเรื่องการเมืองเราก็มองว่าเวลาเราถามคำถามนักการเมืองระดับนายกเนี่ยเขาต้องเวลาเขาจะหันกลับมาตอบเราทุกครั้งนะคะ
จริงๆก็เป็น plus
ใช่ค่ะคืออาจจะด้วยนักข่าวที่เป็นที่รู้จักส่วนหนึ่งนะคะแต่ว่าสองคือคำถามของผู้หญิงบางคำถามเนี่ยมันมีความเป็นมนุษย์ที่ตั้งคำถามกับแหล่งข่าวหรือนักการเมืองที่มันแตกต่างจากคำถามผู้ชายนะคะนี่คือสิ่งที่ตัวเองประสบการณ์แล้วก็เคยทำแล้วก็รู้สึกว่ามันมีความแตกต่างกันอยู่นะในความเป็นนักข่าวผู้หญิงกับนักข่าวผู้ชายแล้วในสังคมการเมืองของเมืองไทยมันต้องการนักข่าวผู้หญิงที่ไปถามคำถามกับมนุษย์การเมืองผู้ชายที่ไม่ค่อยมีหัวใจความเป็นมนุษย์นะคะ
Just basically, I mean, working in politics as a woman, covering Thai politics, I'd interviewed many prime ministers since Thaksin, until Prayut here. And being a female reporter is, sometimes is a bit of a plus, because the way that a woman journalist ask questions to these senior Thai politicians, prime minister level and so on and so forth, it's almost like it pushed them to answer. Sometimes as the way that I know that she noticed is that being a woman journalist, and not just because I'm well known or anything like that, but women journalists in general in this particular field covering Thai politics, it's almost like the way you ask questions really pushes the buttons that forces these politicians to answer more than male journalists.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
ขอพูดถึงเจยุได้ไหมคะ
ได้
เจยุ
สิ
ยุวดีธัญศิรินี่แหละคือตัวอย่างของนักข่าวผู้หญิงที่เขาตั้งคำถามกับนักการเมืองผู้ชายแล้วจนทำให้แบบหลายนายกหลายคนโกรธแบบเสียคือเสียไปเลยแล้วไม่อยากถามคำถามจนถึงขั้นล่าสุดในรัฐบาลพลเอกประยุทธ์การถามคำถามของเจยุทำให้เจยุต้องออกจากทำเนียบไม่ได้เป็นนักข่าวและสุดท้ายก็ซึมแบบก็เสียชีวิตไป
To add,
ใช้ความเป็น
to
ผู้หญิง
add to my point, there's a senior Thai reporter who passed away 2 years ago now, Yuvadi, who's a regular correspondent at the government house for I think several decades, and she uses this sort of female presence to ask tough questions on politicians. And the latest, I mean, if some of you that follow Thai politics will get what I mean, is that she asked very tough questions to Prayut, and they eventually they kicked her out of the government house and before she passed away. But I mean, that's just to show why women reporters so important in covering Thai politics.
Right.
There's a precedent.
Right. I see. Okay. That's interesting. So we're kind of dealing with two things here. One is like the Thai situation, and I think the broader thing is also in the Asian context, and I suppose also worldwide. There's certain similarities in a lot of these issues that I think women journalists are dealing with here, and there are very specific ones. So I hope we're getting somewhere in sort of defining what some of the differences is. But I'd like to turn to, I mean, you've all done some fantastic pieces, I think, that do make a difference, and particularly in this field of both gender issues and highlighting also the inequalities in Thailand and beyond the region. But so I would like to ask each of you what stories you feel have made a difference and what you're most proud of in this field. And I know in particular, Pear, you've just done a very long and prominent report with your colleague Jasmine on a very new field in Thailand, which was groundbreaking. So maybe you could tell, and also the piece you wrote highlighting the plight of sex workers in COVID, these sort of things. So, and maybe after that, Terry, you could talk also.
So very recently, me and my co-author Jasmine, we covered a very month-long extensive investigative piece on a sexual misconduct case at Thammasat University between a professor and his student. And we realized after several interviews that it hasn't just been one student, there were many other students that he allegedly kind of contacted, but what was very groundbreaking, like Gwen said about the case, is the fact that the topic that we covered isn't clear cut. What we talked about was about a relationship that was consensual, but was also manipulative and was also related to power dynamics and the nuances and ambiguities of sexual harassment and misconduct. And I think what was really special about it is that we managed to open up this dimension and this dialogue within Thai society that I think has been recognized on a global scale, that these things do exist, these nuances do exist, but it has just mostly been swept under the rug in Thai society because, as we also mentioned in the article, even when we brought it up in the newsroom at Thai Inquirer, one of our male editors said that, this would have been easier to write about and would have been a stronger case if it was directly about rape. But this isn't about rape, and it's about the nuances in sexual misconduct. And I would say 95% of the reaction was very positive. You know, Tara reached out to me that she was really moved and touched by the story, and she also thinks that it's very, very important.
Yeah.
And the other piece that I recently wrote was about, it's called Shunned and Left Behind. It's about sex workers not being recognized by the state. And basically, I kind of just wanted to highlight the fact that sex workers are still unprotected by law. They are not recognized as individuals who are working legally 9 to 5, not 9 to 5 jobs, but just working to feed themselves and their families. And we've interviewed a couple of sex workers and foundations just to talk about the stereotype that is placed on Thai women and what is deemed as a good woman and a bad woman. Yeah.
Right.
And I think something worth mentioning is this, it's a piece that I wrote that wasn't very hard-hitting, but I went to Chiang Mai for a couple of days back in August, and I interviewed a professor about Lana culture. And what I discovered also through that interview, and I wrote a piece on it, is about the Lana woman, and that once upon a time, within that kingdom and area, Thailand, what is now deemed as Thailand, was actually a matriarchal culture before it became patriarchal. So as you can see from like the terms mena, metap, everything begins with the mother. So I just wanted to leave that.
Right. And these are the ones that obviously meant something to you. And also, particularly in the Thammasat case, I think probably highlighted maybe to readers, a lot of readers in Thailand who weren't aware that worldwide in the West, you know, in universities are building this into their you know, rules of conduct, including consensual relationships are off limits in a lot of Western universities. So I think that was really reminding people that Thailand is still has a, you know, has a way to go to fall in line. So yeah, well done. And Tara, you.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about covering women's issues, and I've done a lot of coverage, including some things. I've followed the women's movement in Thailand a lot, and some of the things I've covered include how universities got together and were talking about how to make campuses more equal and safer for women. I've covered a conference that Thai authorities were given about how to approach sexual assault cases and how to be more understanding, how to better serve the victims. School uniforms and like school uniform laws, how a skirt has to look a certain way, how women are supposed to dress a certain way, as well as gender-based violence in Thailand. But I think the story that I'm most proud of is also an investigative piece I did a while ago about a yoga and tantric school, or what many people would label a cult. Yeah, and it was, so basically the school that is in Pangan has been operating for over a decade, and the leader, who's a Romanian expat, has operated the school for over 15 years with absolutely no accountability. And dozens of women, at least dozens of women and former employees have alleged sexual harassment and misconduct, as well as a very male-dominant curriculum, very male-dominated, telling women that they have to serve men, that they have to follow men, and giving very vulnerable women, a lot of women who come with trauma of some kind. I know women whose father just passed away, and getting advice like, oh, you have to have sexual intercourse with all your senior teachers, and they will unblock your chakras and take as many lovers with people from as different star signs as possible. So these kind of narratives being perpetuated at the school over and over again with absolutely no accountability. And when these women would speak up or seek help, they would receive no support from either the people within the school or from Thai authorities. And I've talked to the Thai authorities a lot, when I was working with this case, and it really, really highlighted the problem about how unfriendly our justice system is to cases when it comes to sexual assault. The cop that I spoke to, which was very powerful in the island, said things like, what happens with, also a lot of the victims were foreigners. So he would say things to me like, whatever happens with these female foreigners behind closed doors is their business, not ours. Or saying like, we can't prove anything, maybe they're, so very, very little, they did a lot to discredit the women. It was met with complete skepticism before investigating it. There's never been a formal investigation into the school, even though the stories have been come out over and over again, and it's been picked up by a bunch of different publications. It's been covered on Netflix. Still, the school is still happening with no accountability from local police. And I think it's a very important, I think in Thailand, there is a lack of accountability when it comes to cases like this. And I think it was a very important conversation to have, and it was a very important story to tell, especially for women who were victims of this expat.
This is particularly interesting because now as a freelancer, these are the sort of investigative thing really requires often backup of an organisation. So it's particularly brave for a journalist, and particularly I think a woman journalist, to take on some of these big stories just being a freelancer. But this does lead me to the next topic, which is the power of social media, and whether social media per se, and I know Tapani yourself, you stream off the web quite a lot. We all rely on Twitter for so much of our information, but I wonder if what you might call non-mainstream journalists, like, in the old days it was mainly middle-class guys who were getting the mainstream jobs in journalism, and there were fewer women, but has the rise of social media, Twitter, Instagram, you can turn yourself into a personality, but also as a freelance journalist, you can get your important stories out there. Has that benefited women? Well, Taz, do you have it?
I feel like these guys and her probably have more
Microphone.
answers on social media. We're not really.
Yeah, sure.
I can start with that, if you don't mind. I think social media has great impact on a lot of stories that are maybe voiced by the people that are often ignored. Like, for example, there's a lot more accountability. There's a lot more public pressure. Stories like, I know one time there was a story about a school director that was alleged of sexual harassment of a female student. And I think with social media, that kept the pressure going. People kept on demanding for updates, kept on demanding for what was happening. And I think that really upped the accountability of this case, which otherwise wouldn't have happened traditionally in the Thai media landscape. And I also think it allows a lot of movement to have blossomed, more, like notably, of course, Me Too and Don't Tell Me How to Dress. It's began a lot more conversations around not only just equality, but things that have been more sensitive and more taboo in the past, like gender-based violence, like domestic violence. So it's definitely highlighted more, allowed more women's issues to be on the forefront and to be discussed. But at the same time, I do think social media, it's a double-edged sword because it's not all positive. I think social media does open more room for harassment, especially with, I don't know, I mean, in my personal opinion, I've got a lot of, I've seen and witnessed a lot of.
You mean trolling and
yeah,
things
like
that. So you mean on social media, bullying?
Yeah. Like, I don't, maybe you guys have more to say, but when you guys are, you all know this, but when you're hiding behind a screen, there's more you know, people are more likely to say whatever they want to say, not necessarily that they would say in real life.
But do you mean you think women are more vulnerable to that, or more in the front line of that, or?
I would, personally for me, some of the feedback or some of the negative comments I've gotten are gender-based. So I couldn't speak for the male, you know, media people, but I do believe that it does open you up to, it makes you more vulnerable in a way, because you put yourself out there, you're inviting the public to, you know, talk to you, make comments about you. And also I think as much as social media has been helpful in a lot of ways, it's also impacted women in general in very negative ways. It's created very false sense of self. It's, you know, made young girls who look to the media, who look to social media to socialize. It's created this bad, this unreal expectations for women, and it has increased depression amongst young women who are still growing, developing, and going through their formative years. It's really influenced their thoughts, and yeah, so I think it's a double-edged sword when it comes to social media. But as a freelancer, I'm very grateful for the ability to do my work independently and use social media and utilize social media as a tool for my work.
Right. Well put. Pear, you wanted to say something? And then maybe...
I completely agree with Tara on the downfalls of social media and how it actually can serve as a breeding ground for echo chambers and just people being completely radically uncensored. But so that's like the topic of social dilemmas and just echo chambers and rabbit holes and just hate speech. But if I were to answer a question, Gwen, I'm just gonna talk about, again, my experience as a young person who grew up with social media. I think a lot of the things that I've learned about have been from Tumblr, social media, Instagram. A lot of the issues and causes and a lot of the things that are happening around the world, I know all thanks to social media, which unfortunately I wasn't given the chance to have such discussions in school and educational institutions. I think social media, if we use it well enough, and I think it's a conversation that we're continuing to have, and I think in the future, most likely and hopefully, there would be laws implemented for the use of social media. Growing up, I also think that the fact that I speak English, I was able to access certain information and knowledge that were otherwise inaccessible, unfortunately, to a lot of Thai-speaking individuals, especially in terms of human rights and the Me Too movement, which I also think the Me Too movement has a resonance in Thai society now and in Asia because of social media, because of the hashtag, and because I cover culture for Thai Inquirer. I cover a lot of the trends and the hashtags on Twitter. If you read my articles, I report a lot on this is trending on Twitter and whatnot, and a lot has been about ข่มขืนผ่านจอพอกันที enough with the rape scenes on television, sexual harassment in schools, cases like that. I think the kids or the people on the internet, netizens, are always talking about it, which is very inspiring. And hashtag FameTwit or, you know, women's rights movement that have been also out on the streets protesting. Videos have gone viral. There's been great reception. So I think Thailand is becoming a more progressive society because social media has given the voice and the platform for the groups that were otherwise unrepresented on the mainstream landscape of Thai society. And now they have become the majority.
Right.
And people are listening and people are talking about it. And I really believe that in the future we could definitely become a more free and democratic society because the people out there are unstoppable right now.
Right. But
And I just want to mention also, I just have like this very, very clear memory of Kun Thapani during the 17th October tear gas incident, and she's like, "ไม่เป็นไรพี่โอเค," and then she just like closed her eyes and there was water. Like that is an iconic scene for me, and yeah, it's very inspiring. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, yeah, no, she also inspires me. I was reading how covering the Rohingya, your cameraman gave up, ran out his
Yeah.
camera or whatever and had to leave. And you went back on your own and did it all with a mobile phone, which is also pretty resourceful. I don't know. I suppose these sort of stories are just kind of intended to suggest that women reporters are tougher than men. I would suggest that, particularly considering how some of you
Definitely.
got your, and Taz, you getting your break
Definitely.
because your cameraman got knocked out. So.
Wait, and also, so I manage the Instagram page for Thai Inquirer, and I can see that we get a lot more engagement when it comes to women's issues and about rape and things like that. And a lot of the times, the pieces that I have written about women's issues and issues about minorities, it does really, really well. So yeah,
Right,
statistically,
so-
it's proven also that it's working.
What your point it being that this is a popular area that maybe media could attract more
For sure.
attention with.
sure.
In that case, they probably need a lot more women and non-mainstream reporters to pick up on
For
this
sure.
because I'm not sure if that's the case though.
Hopefully.
Would you like to say about any particular story? Well, Kuntapani, you've done so many stories over your career that I'd hate to ask you to nominate sort of just a couple, but what do you feel have made in the field of women's issues or highlighting these kind of gender, what's a couple of the things you've done that you're proud of or felt made a difference? And maybe give Kuntapani time to
ก็อย่างที่ทราบว่าเรื่องเยอะมากมันอาจจะเป็นเรื่องแบบเล็กๆแต่ว่ายังมองว่ามันเป็นเรื่องสำคัญมากสำหรับผู้หญิงแล้วก็มันยังคงเกิดขึ้นในสังคมไทยหรือแม้แต่ว่าในสังคมโลกเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของการค้ามนุษย์ผู้หญิงก็มักจะถูกเป็นเพศที่ถูกมองว่าเป็นเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของเหยื่อทางเพศอยู่ตลอดโดยเฉพาะเด็กที่มักจะถูกนำมาเป็นเหยื่อการค้ามนุษย์ยำทำข่าวการช่วยเหลือเหยื่อค้ามนุษย์เป็นเด็กหญิงจากลาวอายุ14 ปีซึ่งถูกนำพาจากประเทศลาวแล้วไปค้าประเวณีอยู่ที่อำเภอสุไหงโกลกจังหวัดนราธิวาสเด็กเนี่ยถูกพามา2 เดือนแล้วก็ถูกขังไว้ที่เป็นร้านคาราโอเกะที่สุไหงโกลกพ่อแม่ก็ติดต่อได้ก็เลยแจ้งมาทาง NGO ก็เลยกับทางร่วมมือกับทาง DSI ที่เข้าไปช่วยเหลือในวันนั้นเราก็เข้าไปช่วยเหลือเหยื่อนี้ได้เป็นเด็กอายุ14แล้วก็มีอีกหลายคนประมาณ 5-6 คนที่เป็นเด็กผู้หญิงที่ถูกนำมาค้าประเวณีที่นราธิวาส
So yeah, in my experience, I mean, I've done many stories, but one that come to mind straight away is it's a small kind of story, but it's about human trafficking, and woman has always often fell prey to human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And this is a story about a 14-year-old girl from Laos who was trafficked to Suhai Kolok in Narathiwat, southern deep south Thailand, bordering Malaysia. She was there and locked up in a karaoke store for 2 months. And through sort of work with the DSI, we went and sort of free her.
เราก็ได้ไปช่วยเหลือเหยื่อที่เป็นน้องอายุ14อะค่ะคนนี้ได้เขาก็หลังจากดำเนินคดีเสร็จเขาก็ส่งตัวกลับไปอยู่ที่ประเทศลาวคือผ่านไป1 ปีแล้วก็หลังจากทำข่าวเสร็จเราก็ไม่ได้ติดตามหรือทราบข่าวจนกระทั่งวันหนึ่งเราเดินทางไปที่นครหลวงเวียงจันทร์ที่ประเทศลาวเราไปนั่งทานอาหารที่ร้านแพที่เขื่อนที่ในเวียงจันทร์ระหว่างที่เราไปเข้าห้องน้ำเราก็เดินออกมามีเด็กผู้หญิงคนนึงก็ดักรออยู่หน้าห้องน้ำแล้วก็มาสวมกอดทันทีที่เห็นหน้าเราเขาก็สวมกอดเราบอกพี่แยมนี่ไหมนะเป็นน้องที่จำไหมได้ไหมที่พี่เคยไปช่วยหนูจากที่โกลก
So and after I did that story, and a year on from there, I forgot about it. I was just traveling to Laos. I was in Vientiane at a restaurant in Vientiane. I went to the bathroom and I came out. There was this girl waiting for me, and then she just hugged me and said, "This is you remember me? You helped me. You saved me."
ตอนนั้นเราก็เห็นหน้าน้องแล้วเห็นเราน้องเขาก็ร้องไห้แล้วก็เห็นน้องเขามากอดเราก็รู้สึกน้ำตาเราก็ไหลมาโดยไม่รู้ตัวเพราะว่าสิ่งที่น้องกำลังบอกเราว่าเนี่ยวันนี้เขาได้กลับมาอยู่ที่บ้านแล้วเขาแค่มาทำงานเสิร์ฟในร้านอาหารแล้วได้กลับมาอยู่พ่อแม่เหมือนเขาได้ชีวิตใหม่จากการที่ในวันนั้นเนี่ยเขาได้รับการช่วยเหลือ
And she was in tears, and I was in tears, and she told me that she through that whole ordeal she's now back at home, with her parents working. It's like a new life, so having a new life.
จริงๆมันอาจจะเป็นการเปลี่ยนแปลงในชีวิตของเด็กผู้หญิงคนหนึ่งแต่เรามองว่าณวันนั้นข่าวที่เราทำมันไม่ได้มันมีคุณค่าเฉพาะแค่ว่าเกิดการกวาดล้างขบวนการค้ามนุษย์นะแต่มันมีคุณค่าสำหรับเด็กผู้หญิงคนหนึ่งที่เขาตกเป็นเหยื่อแล้วเขาได้รับโอกาสในการกลับไปมีชีวิตที่บ้านเกิดของเขามันก็เลยทำให้รู้สึกว่าหน้าที่ของนักข่าวมันไม่ได้มีแค่ทำข่าวแล้วก็จบไปเราสามารถจะช่วยเหลือผู้คนได้อีกมากอันนี้เป็นแค่เคสเดียวที่ยำทำแล้วยังไม่รู้ว่ามันทำให้เรามาตอกย้ำในการทำหน้าที่เราเสมอว่าบางทีนักข่าวที่ยิ่งโดยเฉพาะนักข่าวที่เป็นผู้หญิงอะค่ะเวลาไปเจอเคสลักษณะนี้ความเป็นผู้หญิงมันทำให้เราเข้าใจความเป็นมนุษย์หรือความเป็นผู้หญิงด้วยกันมันจะไม่ได้ทำงานแล้วก็ผ่านไปแต่เราสามารถที่จะช่วยเขาอะค่ะให้ได้รับโอกาสแล้วก็ชีวิตที่ดีกว่าแล้วก็ตรงนี้มันก็กลายเป็นแรงบันดาลใจของเราในการทำงานแบบนี้ค่ะมากขึ้นเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของการค้ามนุษย์แล้วก็สิทธิมนุษยชน
So I mean, it may be a story about one girl, but essentially, she was a victim, and it reflects sort of the larger issues about women and exploitation here. And changing a life of one girl is very significant. And me as a female reporter covering, I want to tell other reporters, other female reporters, you're not just covering the news. You can actually help out. You can help people. Doing your job properly, you can help people change their lives.
ตอนนี้ก็เห็นนักข่าวผู้หญิงนะคะเยอะมากที่คือดีใจที่เห็นน้องๆนะคะแบบสนใจแล้วก็ทำงานแบบนี้แล้วก็น้องก็ทำได้ดีด้วยแล้วก็เก่งมากด้วยแล้วก็อยากเห็นแบบนี้เยอะๆนะสิ่งที่ทำอยู่ทุกวันนี้ในสนามเนี่ยบางทีทำเนี่ยไม่ได้แค่ว่าทำเพราะว่าตัวเองยังคงรักที่จะทำงานนะคะทำเพื่อให้น้องๆเนี่ยได้เห็นแล้วก็ได้ให้มั่นใจว่าเนี่ยทำงานแบบนี้ไม่ต้องกลัวการที่เราจะต่อสู้เพื่อสิทธิมนุษยชนหรือตัวสู้เพื่อศักดิ์ศรีความเป็นมนุษย์หรือต่อสู้หรือการช่วยเหลือคนอ่ะมันไม่ใช่เรื่องที่น่ากลัวเลยเพราะว่าพอเราทำงานแบบนี้แน่นอนเราต้องเจอทั้ง I.O. เจอทั้งบูลลี่เจอทั้งอะไรต่างๆมากมายแต่ถ้าให้น้องๆได้รู้สึกว่าเนี่ยอย่างพี่แอมก็เจอมาเยอะมากแล้วแต่พี่แอมยังทำได้แล้วมันเป็นเรื่องที่น่าภูมิใจมากกว่ากับการที่เราสามารถช่วยเหลือคนได้แม้กระทั่งว่าเราจะถูกโจมตีถูกขัดขวางหรือถูกขู่ฆ่าเราก็เคยถูกวางตั้งค่าหัวมาแล้วเหมือนกันนะคะแต่เรารู้สึกว่าเราอยู่เพื่อที่จะเนี่ยค่ะอย่างน้อยให้น้องๆได้เห็นว่าทำงานแบบเนี้ยมันอันตรายมันน่ากลัวผู้หญิงใครๆก็มองว่าโอ้ยทำไม่ได้หรอกมันยากแม้กระทั่งการอยู่ในสนามข่าวการชุมนุมในปัจจุบันมันก็อันตรายมากเหมือนอยู่ในสงครามพ่อแม่คงเป็นห่วงแหละผู้หญิงแต่อะไรถ้าเราได้ทำหน้าที่แล้วเรารู้สึกว่ามันคือสิ่งที่เราภาคภูมิใจพี่แอมทำงานทุกวันนี้มีความสุขเพราะว่าเหมือนเราได้ช่วยเหลือคนอยู่ตลอดเวลาช่วยเหลือคนทุกๆวันมันก็เลยแบบไม่เป็นไรฉันรู้สึกฉันมีความสุขที่ตื่นมาทำงานทำข่าวทุกวันแค่นี้เอง
And it's very heartening for me to see a young woman here and elsewhere who are doing reporting. It's really inspiring because I want to kind of I do things to enable others to do job like me, and people say that reporting for women, it could be tough, covering protests, covering things, it could be dangerous. Your parents might be worried, but I want to say this, that I'm very proud that there are other young women out there who are doing reporter's job, and and I want to show you, like my life, I go through a lot of abuses. I've been abused by information operation, bullied, and others, but I just want to show that reporting is worth it, because it's rewarding, and along the way you get to help people, and that's for me it's very important.
And we hope there are more inspired by these kind of stories and examples to go follow this kind of path. Taz, you were saying?
Oh, it's going to be hard to. These guys come up with incredible stories that they cover. It's going to be hard to match that.
Well, I think what you're doing yourself, like just out there setting an example as a woman camera person, but
I have to say I'm a little bit ashamed that I haven't really unable to focus on women issues and reporting here, because my job required to do many, different types of stories. But maybe one story that stood out, about 5 years ago, AP was part of this. They have a global investigation team that investigated slavery in the fishing industry, and I was able to be a small part of it. It's span over Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. I was part of the Thailand team that cover slavery that used in a shrimp shed in Samut Sakhon area. So we were to go similar stories to Kuntapani. We were working with DSI and be able to raid some of the factories that use underage women, migrant workers, and not just male as well. Of course, after that, the effect is the government, calling you, asking you why you do this. The usual thing that you get is, are you Thai? Why you do something that damaged the country's reputation? That's the number one line that you get when you do this kind of reportings. But we're proud that I'm proud to be part of this team, because I believe that industry have cleaned up tremendously, and things have changed. Rules of suppliers, the big companies that buy seafood now are much more stricter in checking in their suppliers what kind of worker rights and compliance that they have in place. So that's something that I wanted to story them proud that I've worked on.
well, I think yes, and the way what you just said actually does highlight a point, I think, which is that when I started in journalism, which was back in the Dark Ages, I think medieval period, I was probably there, maybe about 10% of women reporters in foreign correspondents, maybe 10% at the most. So I was in the Philippines in the 80s, and probably there was 3 women and about 200 men.
Oh my God.
But what I found was that coming from the outside with a marginal position, I think it sensitizes women reporters more to not just other women's stories, but inclusiveness of other minorities, other neglected stories. So it's, not surprising that the woman reporter will see, if they're looking at migrant workers, the plight of the woman migrant worker, or the Rohingya, who is more focused on, say, what the problems are for the women amongst the Rohingya refugees. So, or even, in a host of other, I'm amazed at the reporting coming out of Myanmar, and some of the reports, to be fair, are by men, but the highlighting, particularly today, International Women's Day, but about all the incredibly brave women protesters who are right out there with the men. But the ingenious things, I think some of you have read some of there's stories with humour as well as, pathos, and also terrible fear and outrage about human rights violations. But there's still, time to highlight the role of women in even that context. So I do think that as genders equalise in journalism, that you will see more spread or a broader inclusiveness of stories and topics and interview subjects, in fact. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that, but I'd like to leave time for questions if we have some. But can I just ask a last one here? We did touch on, obviously, we've all agreed, I think, that Asia overall is a bit behind the West in terms of opportunities for women, recognising complete gender equality, etc. Even in terms of, I think there are salary problems in in Asia between women and men doing the same job. Mind you, BBC had its problem like recently where it was discovered that women were not as well paid as men in some sectors. But overall, I think we've all agreed that Asia has some way to go, and within that, Thailand. And some of that is sort of official and regulatory and also in the workplace issues, but a lot of it is attitudinal as well. So one question I'd like to finish off my bit with is whether what more can be done. I mean, for example, some countries have pursued quota systems, and I was on a newspaper once that actually switched and said, okay, from now on 50% of candidates who apply have to be women, and a lot of organisations are doing that. Should the media reflect that? Should there be quotas? I know some people feel strongly about that. So, Tara, you've got a view, why don't you?
For me, I think quotas are a very slippery slope to tokenism. I think people who are qualified and are right for the job should get the job. I don't think anyone who's, not up for the, regardless of their gender, if you're not qualified, if you're not ready to take on the responsibilities, I don't think you should be put in that position. But at the same time, I do believe that women, especially in media, need more opportunity in decision-making places. I think for me, it's more about educating women and giving them the tools needed to one day be in that position of power, to be in a more senior position. But I don't know if quotas are the way to go.
You don't know if
I just don't know if quotas are the way to go, because I feel like
there are other forms of affirmative action, I suppose. Pear, you're nodding.
No, I was nodding in a...
Oh, you were nodding in agreement,
recognizing what she was talking about, but what I had in mind when you asked that question was also that I think it's also kind of a responsibility on all fronts in different industries, which I know is a very big picture mindset kind of thing, but you have talked about education, which I also think that despite the conversations that we're having, conversations about women and the barriers that we face in society are still not taken very seriously. For example, there are countless rape cases and rape stories being reported in the Thai media, but for some reason it's shocking that they're just very common and normalized now. It's just like, oh, another teacher has abused a child in Surin. And it's shocking how much I have to report on this and find it appalling, but also at the same time I realize that the Thai media cover it extensively. It's kind of just another story of the day, which I think maybe sometimes we do have the knowledge, but there is definitely a mindset problem within the Thai society that needs fixing, which is the patriarchy and the toxicity that comes with it.
Right. So the question about reform, I mean, what do you propose? I mean, you're saying regulatory?
Well, I mean, as somebody working in the media and writing articles and stories, I think it's kind of a very interesting medium to be in because it's very abstract, right? It depends on how people interpret it. So I can only speak for me or like Kun Tapani said, just to work towards something that you think is bigger and greater than yourself and amplify the voices that have been stunted and unheard of, and just continue to talk about these things and really help emphasize that these things and these norms can be very problematic.
Right. And Tasnia, you really are an exception in 1997 becoming a camera person, or 98, when there were no women camera people. So obviously you didn't suffer from a lack of quota or anything. You got in there, but that was partly being in the right place at the right time. I mean, what do you think of what more action? You said there are more women camera people, but I haven't seen that many actually.
Yeah. Well-
Maybe women don't want to do that work. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I think we have to go back to the basics. These two, talk a little bit about have to change you two talk about change of the mindset. So, back to basic of, when you want change and reforms in the society, you start with educations. The school curriculums has to change to emphasize more on women's rights and impunity issues. Well, that's go across all the other problems too. So all that has to start in the school from very young age. And I would also advocate in general for better women's right as a worker's right. Not just for journalists, paternity leave, so father can take turns. If they have family of young child, father can take turn and take care of the kids, and we can go out and work. Little things like that Western women are enjoying and we're not yet. Those are the steps that we have to take to move ourselves and push women to be, up in a sort of equal society.
Right.
Not just in journalism.
Right. I see. That's a very good point. Okay, last word. Keep it very short so that we can have some questions. Yeah.
ค่ะอย่างแรกก่อนต้องถามทาง FCCT ก่อนว่าการจัดงาน Women Day วันนี้เป็นเพราะมีประธานที่เป็นผู้หญิงหรือเปล่า
You want to ask whether the FCCT organized this because we have a female president?
Yeah, it was my idea, but I think I have to say I had 100% backing from Panu. Yes.
มันก็เหมือนกับทุกคนนะคะว่าจริงๆวัฒนธรรมในสังคมไทยการจะยอมรับผู้หญิงนะคะมาเป็นผู้นำเนี่ยมันก็ยังเป็นเรื่องที่ยังเป็นไปได้ยากแม้ว่าเราอาจจะเคยมีนายกรัฐมนตรีเป็นผู้หญิงใช่ไหมคะแต่ก็รู้สึกว่ามันก็ไม่ได้จะรู้สึกว่าความทำให้ส่งเสริมให้การเป็นผู้หญิงที่มีเป็นผู้นำเนี่ยมันได้รับการยอมรับมากขึ้นด้วยซ้ำเพราะว่าตอนนั้นที่นายกปูนี่ก็โดนอะไรเยอะแยะมากมายโดนบูลลี่เยอะมากมันก็ยังทำให้ผู้หญิงที่จะก้าวมาทำงานอย่างเช่นในวงการการเมืองเนี่ยมันก็จริงๆมันก็มีนักการเมืองผู้หญิงขึ้นเยอะนะแล้วก็ในยุคสังคมที่บอกโซเชียลมีเดียที่ก็ทำให้ทุกคนถูกบูลลี่ได้ง่ายแล้วก็มันก็ยังคงมีคนที่กล้าอยู่ซึ่งจริงๆเราก็ไม่ได้มองถึงประเด็นนั้นหรอกว่าความเป็นผู้นำผู้หญิงในไทยเนี่ยมันแม้มันจะมีอุปสรรคมากแต่ว่ามันก็ไม่ได้ทำให้คนมันความกล้ามันน้อยลงมันก็กลับมีเพิ่มมากขึ้นด้วยซ้ำ
So I think it's important to address this issue that women leadership in Thai society is still lacking. We had a female prime minister, but even her, Yingluck Shinawatra, she was abused and also bullied in many ways in a very sort of sexual and gendered way. And I think overall this idea of women leadership is still lacking. And but at the same time, you notice that in politics, because she refers to politics, we're seeing a little bit more female politicians stepping up. And this is my point. I mean, even with the structure, we still see bravery, we still see courage of women kind of trying to push those boundaries, and it's very important.
มาที่เรื่องขององค์กรสื่อไทยจริงๆก็ไม่เคยมีผู้หญิงที่จะเป็นนายกสมาคมนักข่าวหรืออะไรเนาะเราก็ไม่เคยเห็นแหละถามว่ามันเป็นเพราะความเป็นสังคมผู้ชายเป็นใหญ่หรือเปล่าอันนี้อาจจะมีส่วนที่การเข้าไปมีบทบาทนำในองค์กรเหล่านั้นมันมีวัฒนธรรมขององค์กรที่สืบทอดกันมาโดยรูปแบบโครงสร้างของสมาคมสื่อที่ผู้หญิงอาจจะเห็นมีเป็นกรรมการบ้างแต่เวลาการเลือกขึ้นมาก็ยังไม่เห็นมีแต่ว่าปัญหาหนึ่งที่ยังมองว่าการเป็นผู้นำในองค์กรสื่อไทยมันไม่ได้มาจากปัญหาเรื่องของผู้หญิงผู้ชายแต่มันมาจากเรื่องของการเมืองพูดตรงไปไหมคะ
And of course the issue is also institutional, especially in the media. You look at the Thai Media Journalism Association, TGA, there's never been a female leader in the TGA. There's some members, but every time when it's elected, it's always male. And I question whether this is about male domination institutionalized male domination in this industry or in this sort of institution and structures, or at the same time, maybe it's not about male and female, but maybe that position is very political as well.
ต้องขอโทษ
Well,
พี่
yeah, but don't forget, I kicked off at the beginning to say there don't seem to be any women editors and no women in
เขาบอกว่า
senior
ไม่มี
positions.
แบบบก.หญิงก็น้อย
ใช่ค่ะ
So surely to become head of the Thai Journalists Association, they tend to be senior, like editors or
ขึ้นไป
something.
ในบอร์ด
ค่ะ
ก็คงเป็น
We'd like to see you become head of
จ
the
ริง
Thai
ๆ บก
Journalists.
ผู้หญิงก็มีเยอะนะ ไม่ได้แบบว่ามีก็แต่ว่าแต่เป็นบกโต๊ะไม่ได้แบบเป็นระดับแบบบรรณาธิการบริหารหรืออะไรหรือผู้จัดการอะไรก็น้อย แต่ว่าจะยังมองว่าคือมันมีวัฒนธรรมของเขาอยู่ต้องขอโทษพี่ๆสื่อด้วยนะคะถ้าหากว่าต้องพูดอะไรตรงๆคือมันก็มีวัฒนธรรมที่มันจะมีกลุ่มมีก้อนที่ทำงานสืบทอดกันมาแล้วสืบทอดอำนาจกันมาเรื่อยๆถ้ายังไม่สามารถที่จะไป
ตัดตอนได้
แก้ปัญหาเรื่องการสืบทอดอำนาจนี้ได้เราก็ยังเห็นโครงสร้างเดิมๆจริงๆถามว่าส่วนตัวเนี่ยไม่ค่อยอยากจะยุ่งเพราะว่านักข่าวส่วนใหญ่เนี่ยรู้สึกบางทีไม่ได้รู้ว่าสามารถจะพึ่งพาสมาคมเนี่ยได้ไงเพราะเขาก็เลยไม่ได้สนใจกับการไปมีส่วนร่วมกับสมาคมถ้าหากสมาคมสามารถที่จะทำให้เขารู้สึกว่าเขาพึ่งพาสมาคมอย่างเช่นมีน้องผู้หญิงหรือที่เคยเกิดเหตุการถูกคุกคามทางเพศก็เกิดขึ้นในสมาคมนักข่าวเขาก็ไม่ได้รับความปกป้องคุ้มครองตรงนี้ดังนั้นคือการเรียกความศรัทธาเชื่อมั่นของสมาคมสื่อหรือองค์กรสื่อเนี่ยมันต้องมาก่อนเรื่องของสัดส่วนความเป็นผู้ชายผู้หญิง
And you know and you know I want to be direct about this. I mean in terms of the press association in Thailand, the TJA. I mean first of all, you know they work together to maintain power. You know, through different groups and cliques, and does not really truly represented the media. And you know, serious journalists doesn't really want to get involved because the association doesn't offer any support, doesn't offer anything. And you know, we've seen sexual harassment happen within the institution in the TJA, and the woman did not get protection. You know, the association hasn't helped the press, and that's why people are not getting involved. And this is the problem structurally.
อย่างตัวสั่งส่วนตัวถ้าหากว่าเขาเปิดรับสมัครเคยคิดเหมือนกันว่าถ้าหากว่าจะเข้าไปช่วยน้องๆได้หรือว่าไปเปลี่ยนแปลงอะไรได้เนี่ยถ้าเราจะไปเป็นนายกหรืออะไรสมัครเนี่ยเราก็สามารถที่จะสมัครได้แต่เรารู้สึกว่าในเมื่อตัวองค์กรมันไม่ได้มีความเชื่อมั่นให้กับคนในวงการเนี่ยบางทีการไปทำอยู่ตรงนั้นมันอาจจะไม่มีประโยชน์ก็ได้
And you know, I mean, I had an opportunity to go and join, but you know, there's no point because institution-wise, this is the way it is, and I don't think you know I can create any change in that matter. So there's no point, you know, and they never helped anyone.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks very much. I'd just like to turn it to if anyone does have a question. Please just go to the. I can't see any on Facebook. Can you?
No, it's more of comments.
Yeah, lots of comments and quite a nice. Thank you, people, for watching on Facebook. We had quite a lot of viewers tonight. So if there are no questions, I'd just like to, if any of you would like to have
Any parting words?
A final point.
I just, inspired by everything you guys just said, I think part of the education with women is giving women more opportunity to voice their opinions, no matter how controversial, like more radical, not, I don't want to say radical, but more controversial, and you know, given room to stand up for themselves and defend themselves and speak up for themselves, which I think is still a huge problem in Thai society and in the media industry. Like we said at the going back to the very beginning of the panel, with women expected to be more subservient, I think that really shows in the media landscape because, we're not given the opportunity to be as authoritative as much, and I think it would be great if for the next generations of journalists or journalists moving forward for them to have a platform to express themselves.
Well, I think we can feel greatly encouraged with you two sitting down there that the next generation is well on track to that. And I might make one more point, which is after all our talk about how well women have done in business and how few there are in the leadership in media, but I do have to say, obviously I'm a foreigner in Thailand, but it does strike me that every second Thai man is scared of his wife, and women seem to run the households. So they are very strong, I think, at home as well, which often makes me wonder about, why, because they're strong in business, strong at home. What is it about media? It's a curious thing to think about, I think, but maybe we can revisit the situation next International Women's Day. So on that, there is one hand up there. You have a question? It's just a microphone just behind, because then it comes. Would you mind? It's just there. Otherwise, it's also for people watching on Facebook. Otherwise, they can't hear.
What you just said, when you said, kind of inviting me a little bit, ask this question.
Kuntam, the microphone. Yeah, I think it should be.
I actually come from Japan, so I do see a little bit of a parallel. So I wanted to kind of ask maybe if some women don't want to be in those positions, because that's what I see in Japan, to be honest with you. I'm not really saying that there is no sex discrimination or anything in Japan. I also see a lot of people comfortable in it. The economy is set up, like in a very logical system. The men go to work, and I don't think anybody is
Talking to the microphone, please.
I don't think anybody is interested in taking over the Japanese salarymen, if you know what I mean. So there's not a lot of reason for a Japanese woman to become the Japanese man and, take the midnight train back home, right? There's a lot of Japanese women want to stay home. And that, when you said that a lot of Thai women have power in the house, that's exactly what the Japanese women want. So they're sort of like co-conspirators. They're sort of enabling that situation. And some like minority women who want to be like speaking out because they're not really that kind. Maybe they don't want that status quo. But I still remember the time when my girlfriend said, I get that you can, do things. What I don't get is why you want to do those things. That's exactly it, you know what I mean? So
Right.
I'm just interested in knowing whether Thai society has some parallel there, because you're saying that the women could go into business and do whatever they want. They could, stay at home and rule the world. So why would they want to be journalists? That's an interesting question, because women have their voice. Maybe they don't want to do it. Not to diminish what you're saying.
No.
But
No, that's a good point. I don't know if anyone has.
I don't have an answer to that. You know?
Yeah.
But I just wanted to put it out there because I see it happening, and statistically, that's the most important thing that's happening. Women don't want to be in politics. Maybe they just don't have the testosterone.
Right. Yeah. No, that is a point of view, and quite possibly that does cover quite a lot of women, and there are also, obviously, a lot of women also who need the encouragement or need the support. But I think it's a very good point, and thank you. Being half Japanese myself, I completely relate to that. Oh, sorry, one more. Okay, last one, and then can you identify yourself? Sorry, I forgot to ask.
Hi, so I was wondering if any of you women have had an experience...
Could you just identify yourself?
Hi, my name is Caitlin, and I used to work as a reporter in the United States. And in my experience as a reporter in the United States, we had problems with a pay disparity at our paper, where many of the women were getting paid less than our male counterparts. Also, in my experience, some situations seem to be a little too dangerous for a woman to go alone without a man to a certain situation. Like to a drug bust, I was told to go with a male editor instead of another female photographer. I was wondering if you guys have had any experiences with any pay disparities or certain situations where you're trying to report on something, and because you're a woman, they feel like you cannot do it alone.
Right, thank you. That's a good point. Well, I know, Tapani, you spoke about going on your own to a bust but
จริงๆในไทยนัก
maybe
ข่าว
just
ไทย
very short.
ใช่ไปได้หมดแล้วก็เท่าที่เห็นนักข่าวสายอาชญากรรมที่ทำข่าวเรื่องยาเสพติดก็มีผู้หญิงเยอะกว่าผู้ชายแล้วก็อย่างเราก็ไปทำข่าวที่ชายแดนใต้นะคะก็ ที่มีพื้นที่สงคราม ก็ในไทยนักข่าวไทยไปได้หมดเนี่ยก็เราก็ไปทำกันแม้กระทั่งตอนนี้ข่าวการเมืองนี่คือ very dangerous นะคะ อันตรายมากเรื่องของในไทยเนี่ยจริงๆยังมองว่านักข่าวผู้หญิงไทยอ่ะชอบทำข่าวแบบเนี้ยดังนั้นคือจะกล้ามากกว่าผู้ชายอีกเวลาที่จะต้องไปทำข่าวแบบเนี้ยผู้หญิงอ่ะอาสาไปก่อนผู้ชายอีกด้วยซ้ำส่วนเรื่องของเงินเดือนจริงๆในไทยเนี่ยมันไม่แตกต่างนะไม่แตกต่างในความเป็นผู้หญิงผู้ชายว่าจะได้ผู้หญิงได้เงินเดือนน้อยกว่าผู้ชายมันแตกต่างเรื่องขององค์กรมากกว่าถ้าอยู่ในองค์กรที่สำนักข่าวใหญ่ก็จะได้เงินเดือนเยอะอยู่สำนักข่าวที่อาจจะเล็กก็ได้เงินเดือนไม่ได้มากใช่ไหมคะแล้วก็ประเภทขององค์กรมากกว่าสื่อทีวีก็ยังคงมีอัตราเงินเดือนสูงสื่อหนังสือพิมพ์อัตราเงินเดือนน้อยกว่าสื่อออนไลน์ปัจจุบันมากกว่าสื่อสิ่งพิมพ์มันตรงนี้เลยจริงค่ะ
So on the two issues you mentioned, like on drug busts, on sort of things, I've been to these things and I cover them, and I would say that it's fairly safe, and women journalists in Thailand covers a lot of things on their own. I go to the deep south, it's a conflict area. I cover that, and in many ways I've seen that many women journalists in Thailand prefer to cover these very dangerous assignments because it's exciting. And I don't see that as an issue here. On the pay differences, from my experience, from her experience, the differences is not that much between male and female. The real differences is more on organizational basis. So you have, your usual, large organization, television channel still pays a lot more than newspaper, and now online media is also making more income than newspaper as well. So not much of an issue here in that sense.
Right. And Taz, yeah.
Just want to add, not about the safety issue, but just a sort of a lighter note on what women can do and cannot do. As a photographer here, I think it's one of a very rare country where in some of the official function we are required to wear skirt and female shoes, and it's a requirement. If you don't do it, you can't get access, and that's very tough because I work with heavy equipment. We have to work outside, outdoor in the field for hours and standing and walk for kilometers, and you in a skirt, in a very. And you can't wear sneakers. You have to wear female sort of ballet shoes. That's the rules. And I hope that one day in 2025 or I don't know what year, someone will wake up and say, this is not fair for us. It's just physically not fair.
มีจริงๆความเป็นผู้หญิงอ่ะในทำงานเกี่ยวกับเรื่องความเสี่ยงกับองค์กรที่อย่างเช่นไปทำงานตำรวจทหารน่ะความเป็นผู้หญิงนักข่าวผู้หญิงมีโอกาสในการเข้าไปทำข่าวแบบเนี้ยง่ายกว่าผู้ชายอีก ไม่ใช่ความสวยนะคะแต่บางทีมันการแบบทำงานแล้วมันอาจจะได้รับความเอ็นดู
I mean, it's quite an irony is that working here, said with military and the police, for example, they actually prefer to work with female journalists in many of these assignments more than male journalists, and it maybe it's just the way that they approach, female and stuff. It's not just about sort of, sexuality or anything like that. It's more like the culture.
แต่ก็เสี่ยงเหมือนกันถ้าส่งน้องที่สวยๆไปเพราะอาจจะถูกคุกคามได้ง่ายมันต้องแบบประมาณนี้
But there's also risks if you're, of abuses, of course.
Fine. Okay. Well, on that happy note, I'd just like to thank each of you for really great insights, and also our token, not token, our male member of the panel. No, seriously, thank you very much, Panu, for joining us, and thank you everyone for coming tonight.